Locho ya sampo pa gyu trashi pa tuche tempe chinle yarngo da pege drolor zampe ze parache pande lame shabla solvade Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimo Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hom Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimo Nishasane Kar Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hom Om Guru Vajradhara Sumatimo Nishasane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke Kudan Dagi Lu Pakyuke Sundan Dagi Nga Pakyuke tudan da geyi ten yerme çıktı cingilo Makyuke kudan da gelu Makyuke sundan da gina Makyuke tudan da geyi ten yerme çıktı Jingelo.
Chishime Totam Rarishya
de Gempadi Sange Shindula Mikte Ulvarki Drogunamda Shingla Chepare Sho Yedam Guru Ratna Mandra Kam Niryatayami Sangye Chodan Soge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapso Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drula Pinchira Sangye Druparasho Sangye Chodan Soge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapso Chi Dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchira sangye druparasho sangye chodan tsogi chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapsu chi dagi chushe gibe sonam ki drola pinchira sangye Druparasho Ayike da Drudanu Chinke Drubonda
as it's said in this very important text called Lama. The sickness, it should be known. The causes of the illness should be abandoned. Just like to reach the state of well-being, the medicine should be applied. One should follow the treatment. So, and in the same way, suffering, its causes, the state of cessation should be known, abandoned, and desired, and followed. What's important? Something important to cure oneself from a sickness. There are important points. The first thing is that we need to be aware that we are sick, because it would be difficult to. I mean, one wouldn't follow a treatment or take medicine, which often is not pleasurable, if one doesn't even know that he's sick. There's even a Tibetan proverb that says, generalizing or just paraphrasing, it says everything that is sweet is poison, and everything that is bitter is medicine. The concept is that if we don't know that we're sick, then it would be hard for us to do something up to get better. So the first thing is that we need to be aware. The second thing, I need to have the correct diagnosis to know what the causes are. So no matter how much I want to be cured from a sickness, if I can't eliminate the causes, I'm going to keep suffering. I had an own personal experience in these past months where I had a problem related to gastric reflux. Maybe some of you know that, like in December, I wasn't so well. So I was aware of having that problem. I wanted to eliminate it, but I wasn't able to get the right diagnosis as to why I had that. So I wasn't able to apply the right treatment until I was able. And then at that point, I followed the treatment, believing in it, and I'm cured. I was cured. So, but if we don't know what the cause is, we're not going to resolve the problem. Like, for example, I had pain that I had this pain here in the back of my neck, and often I had pain there, and I did everything. I went here and there, and in the end, it had to do with my intestines. And I once say, what does this muscle have to do with one's intestines? Well, there's tension in the intestines that creates a tension in the scapula, and then the pain comes. So, no matter how many massages I had, or no matter how, when you are applying a treatment that is not the right one, it's not going to resolve the problem. So first of all, we need to be aware, I'm sick. And the second thing is that we need to understand why. How did this sickness come about? We need to know the causes of the sickness to be able to eliminate it. Our tendency is not to treat the cause, but to focus our attention on the symptoms. Often, the cause of a sickness is apparently doesn't have to do with the symptom. Often they're two different things. Like my example from before. I mean, how does this pain here in my neck, have anything to do with my diet and my intestines? So, but instead, they are connected, or with emotions. I mean, there's so many things. So, what happens is one of the most important points is to understand what the cause is. What is this interdependence that generates that symptom? Because the sickness in itself is a state of lack of balance. When there's lacking harmony in Tibetan medicine, of sickness is described as the lack of harmony among the elements. So this lack of balance between these like wind and bile and phlegm. There's some sicknesses that right away don't show symptoms, but then at a certain point, the symptoms come out. And then when we have a sickness that doesn't have symptoms, then it's harder even. It's harder to cure because we're very focused on symptoms. I don't know if it's ever happened to you, like you've had a problem, and then you have a treatment, and then the symptoms go away, and then you stop the treatment. When instead the sickness is still there, that inner state of imbalance is still there and not totally cured. So the first thing is that we need to recognize, because if I negate being sick, I'm never going to follow this process of getting better. And then I should understand deeply what the causes are, and abandon the causes of this sickness. And this is a difficult point, because the causes, in most cases, these causes are related to our lifestyle. There are habits, and we don't want to abandon those. And then there's the third point, which is very important. Where it says, I need to believe that I can get better. I need to believe in the state of well-being, of health. As a direction, as an objective, I have this state of health. This is something that also in our society, in our cultures, often it is missing, because if we see that medicine, even like psychiatry, for example, the other day I heard something that made me reflect. I mean, if if you take all the studies on the human mind, like from Freud, etc., the reference point were sick people. What 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 would they have said about the state of the human mind if they had taken Buddha as the reference point? I don't think they would have given the same descriptions or come up with the same systems. I mean, often these systems are based on sickness. Medicine is medical systems are often based on eliminating sickness and not reaching states of health. I mean, these are two different things. I mean, facing a sickness is one thing, but maintaining a state of health is another, good health. So it's really important for us to recognize our state of health and what we need to do to eliminate the sickness and reach this state of good health. But if I don't believe in being able to reach this state of good health, I'm never going to put effort into it. I'll look for things just to take away my symptoms, but I'm not going to change my habits or put effort into reaching something that I don't even know if it exists or not, or much less if I am able to get there. I remember once during a conference, It was not. It was not a conference. It was a morning. There were four doctors who spoke and just exchanged. It's a very particular context. There were like about 100 or so doctors, mostly psychiatrists, and they were speaking among themselves. It was a meeting. It wasn't open to the public. They were speaking among themselves, and they were saying what they thought. And one of these doctors explained a study that had been conducted years ago on patients who had cancer and the different types of treatments that were available. And they tried to see people who had this sickness, and in this case cancer, who were able to get better, and then the sickness didn't come back after a certain number of years. And so they looked at the different treatments and to see what was in common among these treatments and these people. And so they used, very, very different treatments. The only thing that was in common among all these treatments, with all these patients, is that these patients believed that they could get better and that what they were doing was the right treatment. So something that's really important is this faith that says, I can do this. This is really important. And once I have this faith that I'm able to do this, then we need to apply the path. We need to apply the medicine. The medicine is not simply taking a pill. It's about changing our behavior, physically, verbally, mentally. How do I eat? Where do I go? How do I sleep? Medicine is also applying substances and following therapies. But there's so many aspects that need to be seen together in this process of healing. This same logic, and I think it's quite clear, first I need to understand that I'm sick to be able to get better. Then I need to understand, how did this come about? What created this state of sickness to abandon these causes? So it's useless to take medicine if I keep collecting these causes of the sickness. They would be like two opposite energies. It's like saying, I take something against the stomach ache, but I keep eating the thing that is giving me a stomach ache. It's just not going to work. So the first point is awareness, and the second one is recognizing the causes and abandoning them. The third one is recognize that I can get better, so I direct myself towards a state of good health. And the fourth point is to put energy into what should be cultivated to reach that state of health. It's quite clear, isn't it? Let's take these 4 points and let's apply them to a different context. A relationship with another person, for example. Father, mother, son, daughter, friend, husband, wife. First of all, symptoms come out. Conflicts. So feelings of inadequateness or not being comfortable, fights. These are symptoms that show that there's something not going right. Once we recognize that, then, okay, there's a sickness, there's something that's not right. And at that point, we get to the second. What is it that's creating this state of malaise? What are the causes? Oh, I don't give space for the other. I don't see their needs. There's too much arrogance. we can see that there are many, many causes. I'm too, I'm too focused on myself, and I can't see the needs of others. I mean, normally these are the top ones, let's say. And then we should see on our side, I mean, we shouldn't be pointing our finger towards the other. I mean, that's our tendency. I mean, but I can't change others. I can change myself. So it's useless to see what others should be doing or can do. We should be looking at ourselves, in my state. I mean, what can I do? And once I've recognized what are these points that generate conflict, at that point I need to abandon them. And here you need sincerity and humility with yourself. And once that, I say, well, how would I like this relationship to be? I I would like it to be a sincere, joyous, harmonious relationship. Is it possible? I think so. And so to get there, what do I need to do? Oh, I need to respect the other. I need to be kind to my words. I need to take care of my choices and my actions. And at that point, I apply the path. Let's not get into too many details because it doesn't have that much to do with what we want to talk about today. But these 4 passages are fundamental in many aspects of our lives, from sickness or relationships with other people, or it could be related to an economic situation. I mean, if we use this example for an economic situation, the symptoms, I don't have any money, for example. The cause is I spend more than I earn. What do I need to do? Or I need to make more money, or I need to spend less. There are not that many other alternatives. So I need to abandon the bad habits that take me to spend more than I need, or and work on having satisfaction with what I have. So to do that, what should I do? I should try to maybe earn more here. I should try to have less desire here. So and then I do what's necessary to get there. But often, unfortunately, we stay just on that first phase, which is complaining about the symptoms. So complaining about symptoms is, okay, I recognize that I have symptoms and I'm the victim of the world because I have these symptoms. That's not going to solve the problem. That's clear, isn't it? So this is a path that should be applied in many, many areas in our life, generally speaking. Let's say that we went to Buddha, the way one would go to a doctor. Normally when we go to a doctor, and we go because we have something, we have a complaint, we have some kind of symptom. I've got this, I've got that. I don't think I'm well. I don't know how many of you go to the doctor because you like going to the doctor. I mean, I know people who go to doctors because they like going to doctors, but normally one goes to a doctor when there's something wrong. So let's imagine that in front of us there's Buddha. So we say, "Oh Buddha, I'm here to ask for help." And he says, "Well, tell me about your symptoms. What's wrong?" Well, I'm not satisfied. Doesn't matter what I do in my life. I've tried to do so many things, but deep inside there's this kind of dissatisfaction and suffering. I've changed my house, I've changed my job, I've changed my partner, but in the end it's just always the same. And when it seems like things are going well, then boom, something else happens. And then, when a problem ends, another one begins. I'm really tired. I'm tired of suffering. And Buddha looks at us and says, yes, you're sick. Your sickness is caused by selfishness. And the main cause is ignorance. The good news is that you can cure yourself. And there's a treatment, a healing process to follow. But this healing process is not something that I can do for you. You have to do it for yourself, and it's a long process, because unfortunately your sickness is not like breaking an arm or getting a bacterial or a viral infection. No, you have a chronic disease, Buddha tells us. And to cure yourself from a chronic disease requires more time. This sickness is this obsession of self-gratification. And how does it show up? It manifests itself through anger, jealousy, envy, fear, arrogance. And all the actions that we do when we're taken by these emotions, the words that we say, the actions that we take, all these negative interactions that are generated through these states of inner imbalance, these so-called mental defilements. Buddha looks at us and says, but you can get better. It's possible. I did it. I was like you. And I did it. And here I'll show you how, which is called the Dharma. The path is called the Dharma. In the text it says, suffering should be understood, known, and its causes should be recognized and abandoned. The state of ultimate well-being should be believed in, and the path should be applied. This is the path that we should follow. And here it's not about being Buddhist or not being Buddhist. It's about asking ourselves if we suffer or not. There are 4 questions, fundamental to our lives, that have to do with this point. 4 questions. Maybe formally we've never asked ourselves these questions, but we have the answer to these spontaneously. But these really determine how we live our lives, and they're fundamental, because it took me a long time to understand this. But when Buddha taught, for example, the 4 Noble Truths, it's not something that has to do with Buddhism. The 4 Noble Truths doesn't have to do with Buddhism, obviously, yes, but it doesn't have to. But it's not separated from the whole of reality. Why are there 4 truths? Because in our ordinary reality of all of us, independently of our religious context, we have these 4 questions that direct our lives, that shape our world vision and our paradigm, and as a consequence, how we live everything. So what Buddha gives us is he gives us a vision that's different than our own, and I think it's really important that before we look at what Buddha transmitted, the vision of Buddha, we should look at our own view, because there's a danger that we see the Buddha's view like as something marvelous, which it is, but we see it detached from our own reality. Instead, it's really important to connect the, the teachings, in this case the Four Noble Truths, with our own reality. So let's look at what I think, well, not the Four Noble Truths, but the Four Infantile Truths. I mean, they're called noble truths, not because they're noble in the sense that they're superior, or they're truth in the sense that everything else is false. They're called the Four Noble Truths because they are four things, four aspects of life that are lived, seen, I think the aspects of life that are lived by the nobles. I mean, who are these noble ones? These are those who have a perception of reality that matches reality. These arhats who have gotten out of samsara. And so here we're making a difference between noble ones and infantile ones. Those who have eliminated ignorance and have a perfect harmony with everything and have no more suffering. Those are the noble ones, and instead there are the infantile ones who are not coherent with the reality, which would be us. So they're not the truths, but these are this is the vision of those who are called noble ones. They're called truths because the world, it's like the world view of the world view or the point of view of the noble ones. So how are these things seen, from the point of view of a noble one who has gotten out of samsara? So it's why I say, from our side, instead, we're going to look at the four infantile truths, points of view, or visions. So what is suffering? Why do I suffer? What is happiness? What should I do to not suffer, or to be happy? If we use the metaphor from before, what's the sickness? What are the causes of the sickness? What would be the state of well-being, and what can I do to reach that? If we used another terminology, we could say, what is suffering? Why do I suffer? What's the state of happiness? What is happiness? And what do I need to do to be happy and not suffer? Let's start with the first one. What is suffering? Suffering is that which we want to avoid. That we think should be abandoned and avoided. I mean, that's what we see as suffering. The definition of suffering is all the sensations that we have, that we want to finish as soon as possible, and that they do not return. Our vision of suffering, generally speaking, is of two types. There's mental suffering and physical suffering. The physical suffering, there's pain, hunger, thirst, hot, cold. This is mostly what we call physical suffering, and it's the one that's easier to want to eliminate, because as soon as it appears, we want to refuse it. We want to eliminate it. So We don't need to talk too much about physical suffering because we know what it is. Even if, I just open and close parentheses, even related to physical suffering, that most of us, even when we feel physical pain, we don't know where it comes from. So that's why we need doctors. What's the function of a doctor? Is to cure us or to give us the correct diagnosis and the right treatment? But in the end, who cures? Who cures us of our sickness? We cure ourselves by taking medicine and following the treatment. Doctor, what does he do, or what does she do? She sees the symptoms. She does the exams, according to the techniques that one uses, and then says you need to do this, that, and the other, and avoid this, that, and the other. And then it's up to us to avoid this and to follow that. And in Tibetan medicine, it's very clear that a patient that doesn't have the karmic causes to be cured will not be cured. This is another aspect, but let's get back to us. So what happens? The first form of suffering that we recognize is this physical suffering. The second form of suffering that we have is a mental suffering. And by mental suffering, what do we mean? Fear, anxiety, sadness, dissatisfaction. All those inner sensations is these feelings of malaise that are generated inside, that we live mentally. And there are so many different manifestations of mental suffering. And what happens is that when we observe in our own reality, we have much more mental suffering than physical suffering. Am I right? Even when there's a physical suffering, if there's not severe physical pain, normally the mental suffering about it is stronger because we've reached in our modern society, we can avoid physical suffering. We have pills to ease pain. We have heaters and air conditioners. We have food when we're hungry. So we avoid pain in our modern society. But one of these characteristics that's very clear to me in this richer part of the world, in this modern culture, we have less physical suffering, but we have more mental suffering. This is evident. We don't need to explain many details about this. The World Health Organization many years ago said that in 2020, and here we are, that they said that the main cause of death would be depression and all the sicknesses that are correlated. Let's not get into details here, but it's just to say that mental suffering exists. So these are the two main things that we try to avoid. What is what we recognize and what we don't want. And there are other forms where we recognize suffering. There's a material suffering, which could be mental or physical. So this is the suffering that is generated through something material, which could be not having food, or not having a roof over your head, or there can be social sufferings, social inequalities and all the fights that come up through this. But let's not get into details here. It's really important for each one of us to ask himself or herself, what is there in my life, in my own existence, that I want to avoid? What is it that I don't want? What do I want to abandon? What, for me, what is suffering for me? Well, where are the symptoms? What are the symptoms? If I could go to, if I could go to someone and resolve all my symptoms, and I needed to describe and list all my symptoms, what would I say? This is very important to recognize for ourselves what these symptoms are. Is there more anxiety, fear, sadness? Is it dissatisfaction? Is it the sensation of not being enough? Is it solitude? Is it anger? Hate? Is it a physical pain? What is it that really that I have that I don't want anymore, that I want to abandon? This is a question that we need to ask ourselves. And the second point is, why do I suffer? And if we asked ourselves, each one of us, and those around us, I mean, the reality is that most of us have more or less the same view. But if we ask why we suffer, and we look for an answer, not conceptually, but we look for an answer in our daily actions, where we project our happiness and where what we're trying to avoid and to accumulate. Simplifying a lot, you know. And you remember that game as children, the hot and cold, and you look for something, okay, hot, 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 or, okay, in Italian, it's water and fire, hot and cold. So how do you do? So at that point you go into like micro categories. Okay, where do I project my, direct my happiness, outside or inside? So when we're suffering, for example, what do we say to ourselves? Oh, I need to eliminate this dissatisfaction, this erroneous vision that I have of reality. I have to stop projecting this, that, and the other onto that. Or do I say, oh, this person is behaving badly. I can't leave the house. I can't hug the people that I want to hug. I mean, where do we project the causes of our suffering? I mean, when we have suffering on one side, and we try to look for something, or we look for something or someone as being the reason or the source of that malaise. I mean, we do that, right? I mean, when we're suffering, do we just stay blocked and say, I'm suffering and I don't know why? Or do we look for the so-called guilty one? No, but normally this guilty one, is it something inside, or is it something that we can find outside? Normally it's something that we can find outside. Or is it something that's, so either it's something that we have, is something that we have and that we don't want, or something that we want and we don't have. So, and often it has to do with other people. I mean, do we mostly suffer? We we can suffer because people are not how they're supposed to be. We suffer more for that than for how they actually are. So, as a consequence, where do we project our happiness? Where do we project our desires? In an inner state or in an external reality? Not like a idealized reality. I'm talking about like a daily actions. I mean, we project outside. Oh, I wish I didn't have any more wrinkles, and look at my hair, or I wish my son was like this, or my husband like this, or my wife like that, or at work, if my work were different, or if society was like this, or if coronavirus could end just like this. I mean, I could just list many things, many things that we want, and 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 somewhere we have this idealized image of what happiness would be, you know. It's as if we were asking if I could avoid everything that I don't like and obtain everything that I do like and not have to be separated from what I like, would I be happy or not? Yes. This summarizes well, you know, what we call happiness. I mean, I think the ordinary vision of happiness is avoid everything we don't like, obtain everything that we want, and never having to be separated from what we do like. This is more or less where we project our happiness. Do you recognize yourselves in this? What do we do for this in our daily lives? Do we try to we try to avoid pleasant situations with aversion? You know, we try to avoid the situations we don't like, and the things that we think are positive, these objects of pleasure, pleasurable situations. We try to obtain them. We try to avoid suffering and obtain pleasure. And we spend our lives like this. Our life turns around this, avoiding what we think makes us suffer and trying to get what we want. So this all determines how we live our life. I mean, what we intend by happiness and what we intend by suffering. So, but these four questions are not conceptual questions, because we could answer conceptually, philosophically, even on a religious level, or from our direct, spontaneous experience, beyond all the labels that we could put on, like I'm Buddhist, you know, but me, how do I live all of this? This is fundamental. Because if we start from a conceptual point of view, say, okay, what is suffering? Our society tells us what's not right according to where we grew up, our social context, our culture, etc. We have guidelines that were given to us. You know, this should be abandoned, this should be cultivated, this is good, this is bad. There are those who say to be happy, one needs to be free. There are those who say if you're too free with ignorance, it's worse. Better to be well guided. To give an example of two things that are apparently contradictory, if we were to ask what really summarizes the teachings of Buddha, you know, what he transmitted at these 4 points. I mean, what is suffering? Why do we suffer? What's happiness? And what do we need to do to be happy and to not suffer? It's not about becoming or being Buddhist or be part of a religion. It's about changing our paradigm about these points. It's something very deep. It's something difficult, but it's possible. And it totally changes your way of life, way of living. So what Buddha transmitted to us, what is called the Four Noble Truths, and that were then just handed down and transmitted generation after generation. They come to us. It's this vision that is totally contradictory to our ordinary view, but brings to a great state of happiness, and it is deeply coherent, because we can study the Four Noble Truths in an academic, philosophical way, looking at classifications and definitions and natures, and you can debate on it. And one day we can do that. I like it, but I want to bring. I want to touch your hearts, and then we can try to deepen and study. But let's start with the first point, which what is suffering?
Buddha descrisse la sofferenza in tre tipi di sofferenza.
Buddha explains suffering in three different types. The first one is the suffering of suffering.
Poi abbiamo la sofferenza del
Then we have the suffering of change.
Le traduzioni lasciano sempre a desiderare.
So I'm not very thrilled with the translations, but this is how they've been translated. And the third one is all permeating suffering.
Sofferenza della sofferenza. Yurve Dumal, la sofferenza del cambiamento. E Kyava Duce e Dumal, la sofferenza
So we have the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and the composed suffering that permeates all. So these are the names. Let's see what's behind the names. So the suffering of suffering is what we normally recognize as suffering. So it's a physical suffering and mental suffering, and there's not much to say about that because we know them well. What's important is that we recognize suffering as suffering. It's also called the suffering of suffering because on an ordinary level, any being recognize it as suffering. I've never seen any being, a person, like a human or an animal or an insect that have ever seen suffering as pleasure. So physical suffering and mental suffering are inevitably lived like suffering, something that should be abandoned. So when we say something that is something is suffering, then it's something that we want to avoid. It's something we want to abandon. And one could ask, why would you call it the suffering of suffering? Because it's the only form of suffering that naturally we all see as suffering. We all see it as something to abandon. And you don't need to go into too many details about it beyond the fact that it has many, many manifestations. And in our society, it's the mental suffering that afflicts us most of all. And then the second point needs a little bit more explanation. But just one more thing before we get to that point. Most of us, when we ask ourselves what suffering is, we stay with that first point, which is the suffering of suffering. That's the second type. The suffering of change has to do with that which does not show itself as suffering, but is of the nature of suffering. That means that when someone comes into contact with it, it cannot sustain a state of pleasure, but will sooner or later turn into suffering. First of all, with the sensory pleasures. For example, if I'm very thirsty and I drink water, then I have a sensation of pleasure, and that's normal. No? There's someone that I really love, and that person caresses me. It's a pleasurable sensation. I see something that for me is beautiful, and I see it, and it gives me a sensation of a feeling of pleasure. And we're constantly looking for these things. But if I drink water and it gives me a sensation of pleasure, naturally, I want that sensation of pleasure to stay, and I want it to come back too. And for that sensation of pleasure to stay, if I keep drinking water that brought initially that state of pleasure, that keeping on drinking it, is that going to sustain that feeling? You know, 1 glass, 2 glass, 3 glasses, after 4 glasses of water. So what initially brought a sensation of pleasure, after a while it brings a sensation of pain. Someone who caresses us, you know, and it's at first it's nice and it's pleasurable, but then it just keeps going on and on. You know, it's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a half an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. I mean, is that sensation of pleasure? Does it stay the same? Does it increase, or does it diminish? It diminishes up until it becomes suffering. If I see something beautiful, for example, and that first moment it gives me a feeling of joy and pleasure. But if I stay fixed on that object, you know, is that sensation maintained? Does it increase, or does it diminish? You know, if it increases, then just take it and just stay there and don't do anything else. But instead, you know, but what happens that if you're in front of something, like a vision, you know, after a while, that sensation of joy or pleasure is not going to be sustained. One gets bored, or you know, it's like the same thing with the music. You know, if we just keep listening to the same music, you know, for 24 hours, you know, it's going to bring suffering. There's so many examples. This is not a traditional example. It's a term that I use, but I say that the suffering of change has to do with the traps of happiness, the things that show themselves as if they could make us happy, but things that cannot sustain these states of happiness. And mostly, we have three types of these traps. We have the one that's sensory, and let's remember that the trap is not the pleasure, the sensory pleasure, but it's believing that pleasure can sustain happiness. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having pleasures. Nothing. The problem is when I project my happiness onto the pleasure of the water, for example. Because if I drink the water and I have pleasure, and at a certain point that pleasure finishes, what's my tendency? I want more. So what do? I generate attachment towards, or a desire towards something, or aversion to something else. Because if I'm drinking water and then at a certain point I have no more water, it runs out, then, you know, whose fault is this? You know, what happened? I generate aversion. So first of all, it's a trap because it can't sustain our state of well-being. And also, the way we react is going to increase our suffering. So the first trap is the sensory pleasures. But remember that sensory pleasures in and of themselves are not negative. I mean, the trap is projecting onto them as means to happiness. Because there's not a single sensory pleasure that, like, the more I have, the better off I am. There's a proverb in Italian that says, how is it? Now I can't remember. Now I can't remember, but anyway, it has to do with the fact that the more I have, I mean, the desire has no ends. The more I have, the more I want. Someone said something, and he said, "No, it's another one. This one you invented now." there's another one. Anyway,
Più ne ho, più ne voglio.
the more I have, the more I
Più ne
want,
voglio, meno
and
lo
the,
sento io. Però
and
sappiamo benissimo
the more I
che
want,
più ne
the
ho,
less I
più ne voglio.
have. I mean, the more.
Questa è la natura di
This
tutto
is
il
just the
piacere,
kind of
anche
nature
per
of all
esempio,
pleasures. For
riguardo i piaceri
example, like
sensoriali.
related to sensory
Se noi
pleasures.
non poniamo
If
limiti
we don't put
culturali,
limits,
sociali,
social,
ai piaceri
cultural,
sensoriali, la
onto
nostra
these
tendenza è andare
sensory
sempre più
pleasures, our
all'estremo.
tendency would always go to the
Perché?
extremes.
Perché noi vogliamo, per
Because
ottenere quella
to
stessa sensazione di
get that
soddisfazione
same
dopo
sensation of
abbiamo
satisfaction,
sempre di volere
it's never enough. We always need to have more and more and
su
more.
questo apro e chiudo
And here I'm going
parentesi.
to open and close
Per
parentheses.
queste cose,
For
questo è un
these things, and
consiglio non spirituale, è un
this
consiglio
is
mondano,
this is a mundane
ok?
piece of advice I'm giving to you,
Visto che noi ci troviamo in
not
questa realtà,
spiritual, but
ancora
given that we find
io
ourselves
non
in
sono,
this reality,
spero che voi non
we're
siate
not
però,
Buddhas yet. At least I'm not. I hope you are, but I
eh,
don't know.
quello che succede che
So what
cos'è?
happens is
Noi abbiamo desiderio,
we have desire.
proiettiamo
We
sulle cose
project
e una volta che noi riusciamo a capire
desire
qual è la
onto
natura
things.
di queste
Once we
cose,
understand their nature of
possiamo riuscire a
dissatisfaction,
gestirle.
then we can manage the situation a
Come
little
noi in
bit
questo, se c'è
differently.
qualcosa
In
che
just a
ti
few
piace,
words, for example, if there's something that you like,
qualcosa per dire se ti piace bere
like
l'acqua,
for
se ti
example, say
piace
I like to drink
bere
water, or maybe
l'indulgenza, se
you
ti
like apple
piace
juice, or you
mangiare la
like
pasta al pomodoro con gusto, qualunque cosa ti sia piacevole,
pasta with tomato
andare in un
sauce, or
luogo,
go
fare una bella
somewhere, or meet
foto,
someone,
fare qualunque cosa
do
che vi dia una certa sensazione di
anything that
piacere,
brings you a state of pleasure. Don't do that thing too often.
va mantenuto un rapporto
A,
con
re-
quella cosa di
a relation a relationship of conquest and seduction should be
il piacere
maintained
molto
with this
spesso viene
object,
anche
because
dal semplice
because often pleasure comes through
quella
this
cosa mi
state of
piace, però non
conquest.
posso averla
Something
sempre che
I
voglio,
something I
ci devo
like this
mettere
thing,
uno
I can't have it
sforzo
all
per
the
poter
time. I need to put
ottenerlo e
effort
quando
into
lo ottengo
getting
mi
it, and
piace.
then when I have it, oh wonderful.
Quando ce l'ho sempre dopo un
But when I
po',
have it always, after a
perde.
while, it just
Non per colpa
loses its luster.
dell'oggetto, ma
Not for
perché
the
per la
not
natura del proprio desiderio.
not
Quindi
because of the
quando c'è
fault
qualcosa
of the
che è
object, but
piacevole,
because of
dobbiamo
the
mantenere quel
actual
rapporto di
nature
seduzione,
of desire.
facile
So
da
we
ottenere,
should
però è
maintain this
piacevole
relationship of
e va
seduction.
fatto
It's like
con
it's not
fatica.
easy to
Ok?
always
Questa è
have
una cosa
or
che ci
maintain.
mantiene
And
quasi
then
all'inizio
this
mondano.
this
Faccio un esempio
this
banale per
game
parlare. A
of
me piace il
conquest.
panettone,
So, for example,
ok?
I like
Lo mangio
panettone, and
unicamente
I eat it
nel
only
periodo di Natale
at Christmas
e cerco
time,
di
and I
mangiarlo
try to eat just a little because I like
perché se
it.
io vado lì e mi
Because if
compro
I
panettone
bought
per tutto l'anno e mi
panettone
mangio
for
poche paste,
the whole year round, which technically I could do,
dopo di un po'
after a while,
non piace più,
I wouldn't like it anymore
non mi dà più quel piacere.
because it wouldn't give
E
me
così
that
si
same
possono avere
pleasure.
tantissimi
And
altri
there
modi
could
di
be
gioco.
so many things like
Quando c'è
this.
un posto che ci
So,
piace andare,
if there's a
una
place we
persona
like
che
to
ci dà gioia di
go, or
incontrare,
someone who
un qualunque cosa
as
che
someone who
facciamo,
brings us
dobbiamo
joy when we meet them.
mantenere
So
quel
whatever
rapporto di conquista e
whatever it is, we
seduzione
should
che non è
try to
una cosa, non
maintain
dobbiamo
this relationship
banalizzarlo e
of
fare così come se
seduction
fossero
and
perdite quelle
conquest,
cose.
without diminishing
Ok?
the importance. This is
Questo lo faccio
something
vedere
very
in un certo
simple.
rispetto.
So also
Ok?
a kind of
Perché se
a
no,
level of
dopo un
respect
po',
for
la cosa più
for these
difficile non è non
experiences should be
avere l'oggetto di
maintained,
desiderio. La cosa
because
difficile è
it's
non sapere più
what's
che cosa desiderare.
what's difficult is
Non so se è chiara
not
questa
having
differenza.
the objects of
Noi viviamo in una
desire, but it's
società dove
difficult
tutto è
to not
permesso
know
e quindi uno
what
arriva
you
molto
want to
spesso e
desire,
non
because
sa più che cosa
we live in a
desiderare, può
society
fare
where
quello che
things
vuole
are
libero
so
desiderio.
easy to
E lo
obtain
la
that
sensazione di non
one doesn't even
sapere cosa
know what they
desiderare è
want anymore. They don't
molto più
know what they
difficile
desire, and
che
that
quella di volere
state is
qualcosa
very
per volere.
difficult. Is much more difficult than having desiring
Chiaro questo?
something and not being able to get
Chiudiamo
it.
questa
So let's
parentesi,
close this parenthesis
però è
here.
molto pratica e
This is
utile
very
per qualunque
practical and
cosa che noi
useful,
riteniamo che sia importante.
for anything that we
Comunque sia,
enjoy.
ricordiamoci che è una fregatura.
But no matter what, remember it's just a trap.
Se
It's an illusion. The
prima
second,
piaceri sensoriali,
the
seconda
second one.
fregatura, beni
So the first
materiali.
one was sensory pleasures. The second one are
E cose materiali,
material things.
non esiste una che più ne ho
There's
meglio
not a
sto.
single thing,
Non è che più riesco a
material
ottenere
thing that the more
ricchezza,
you have, the better
denaro,
off you
oggetti,
are,
più felice
whether
sono.
wealth or objects.
Esistono anche degli studi
There are
molto
also
chiari,
studies
fatti a
actually,
livello
um,
non religioso,
even like
per esempio dalle Nazioni
non-religious,
Unite.
even
C'è
like
un
the United
report
Nations.
annuale della felicità,
They do
chiamano.
this annual
Questo
report of
prende troppo tempo,
happiness
io
in
non
the
ho letto, potrei anche
United
così,
Nations. I didn't
presto
read the
di
whole
piccoli
thing, but I
passaggi
read
alla volta, e lì
some
parlava
passages
dello
from it.
studio,
And at one point they were talking about a
nella
study that
quale
was
loro
done,
partivano dalla seguente domanda.
and they asked these questions.
I soldi portano la
So,
felicità o no?
does money bring happiness or not?
Risposta
The
sì,
answer, yes.
io sono d'accordo,
And I agree,
fino a un certo
up
punto.
to a certain point.
La cosa importante è
What's
determinare quel
important
punto.
is just to be able to determine that
Secondo
point.
questo studio,
According to this
fatto in
study,
tantissimi paesi, su
done
tante
in many,
persone,
many
eccetera,
different
qual è la
countries,
soglia
what's
fino a quale i soldi
um,
portano alla felicità? Ossia il
up to
benessere
what
materiale porta
point
alla felicità. Qual è la
does money
soglia?
bring
Avere
happiness?
il minimo
This
necessario
is to
materiale.
have the minimal
Se io non ho da mangiare,
material
soffro di
needs.
più. Se
If I
io non
if
posso curare la mia salute,
if I
soffro di più.
if I don't
Se
have
non posso
enough
proteggermi dal freddo
to
d'inverno,
be able to
soffro di più.
feed myself or protect myself from the
Se io non ho il
cold
minimo
or
necessario
take care of my
materialmente, io
health,
soffro di
then I'm
più.
going to
Una
suffer
volta che
more.
io ho
But
quel
once
minimo
I'm able to
coperto, non
cover
importa
all these
quanto io vada
primary
ad accumulare
needs,
ed aumentare,
then
non
anything
aumenta il
else
mio stato di
and that
felicità.
I'm able to accumulate is
Aumentano le fregature,
not going to
le illusioni.
increase my
Però non è che
level of
perché una
happiness.
persona ha di
It,
più che
it,
sia più
so
felice,
it's
questa
not because someone
assolutamente
has
non è
more that
provato
they
in
are
nessun modo,
happier. This has
sia
never been
dagli
proved,
insegnamenti di Buddha che ai
not
moderni.
by Buddhist
Ok?
teachings and not by
Perciò quello che
modern
succede è,
studies.
una
What
volta che io
happens
ho
is
quel minimo
once I
necessario,
have the
io
minimum
credo sia sufficiente.
necessary, and I believe that we all have that
In
here,
realtà quello che si va ad
in
accumulare di
reality,
più non
what we're
aumenta
going
lo
to
stato interiore
accumulate
di
after
felicità.
that is not going to increase
Credere che
our
questo
state of
accada è la
happiness.
seconda fregatura.
And so believing that it would, that's the trap.
Terza fregatura,
The third trap,
scusate, prima di arrivare alla terza, la
before
seconda
getting to
ha
the
un altro
third one, the second
sfumatura
one
molto più
has another aspect to it that's
delicata.
quite
La
delicate. The
seconda
second one
fregatura riguarda
is,
le cose che noi
this
crediamo di
has to
poter
do
possedere.
with things that we believe that
Che
we
è un oggetto
possess.
materiale, un
Can
bicchiere.
also be a material object like a glass.
Noi crediamo di
We
possederlo, però in
believe
realtà
that
non lo
we
possediamo.
possess it, but we don't possess it.
Non diventa far parte di noi.
It's not part. It doesn't become part of
Le
us.
uniche cose che noi
The
veramente
only
possiamo
thing that we
possedere,
can
ciò che
really
ci toglie,
possess
ciò che fa
are
parte del
things
nostro
that
essere.
that people
Io posso
cannot take
possedere
away
amore,
from
posso
us, that are
possedere
part of our
stabilità,
being, like
posso
stability
possedere
or
gioia,
love and
posso
joy
possedere pace,
and
ma io
peace.
non posso
But I
possedere
can't
qualcosa che
possess
può essere tolto e che
something
mi può
that can
essere
be
separato.
taken from me, or
Io
from
posso
which I can be
usufruire
separated.
di tutte le
I can
ricchezze, ma io non
interact
posso
with those
prenderle
things.
perché sono
I can
chiaro
use those
questo.
things, but I can't possess them.
Però noi
Is that clear?
immaginiamo di
But we
poter possedere
imagine that we're
due cose,
possessing these things.
oggetti
These two
e
things,
persone,
objects and
esseri.
people.
Ok? Per noi è più facile capire che
For
non
us,
possiamo possedere una persona.
it's easy for us to understand we can't possess
Però
a
nella pratica
person, but
noi crediamo
practically
di
speaking,
poter anche possedere le
we
persone.
also believe that we can possess
Noi
people. We
proiettiamo sulle persone
project
che
onto
devono essere in
people,
un modo per
that
poterci
they need to
amare.
be in a certain
Noi
way.
proiettiamo
We
sulle
project
persone
onto
che devono
people that they
reagire in
need
un
to
certo
react in a
modo,
certain
che
way.
visto che tu
And,
sei mio
given that
questo,
you
mio
are
quell'altro,
mine,
mio
this is mine,
quell'altro, tu
etc.,
dovresti fare
you
questo e
should do
quell'altro.
this, that, and the other.
Ok? E tutto questo genera
And this generates
sofferenza.
suffering.
Se io riesco a fare in
If
modo che mio
I'm,
padre sia come vuole, che mia madre sia come
if I
vuole, che
could,
mio marito, che mia moglie, questo
for my
mondo sia come
mother,
io
my
voglio,
father, my
ottengo la
husband, my
felicità.
wife, if I could change them and be that,
Quindi
if
anche questa è una
make
grossa
them
fregatura.
be the way I want them to be. Is that going to make me happy? No, that's another trap. Excuse me if I'm so direct, but these interpersonal relationships are marvelous, but projecting one's happiness on to these relationships, that's also a trap because they can't maintain our happiness. We can go and live with a Buddha and we wouldn't be happy. Wouldn't be happy. As long as we have, our own problems. So the first trap, or this is the pleasures. The second one is that material objects and living beings, from your dog to your children, your husband, your wife, everything that we call my. Um, and the third trap would be our image, which is really the most difficult to abandon. It's this attachment that we generate to recognition. For example, someone compliments us. Oh, Lama, this Lama said this about you, on how good you are, how handsome you are. And when we receive a compliment, how do we feel? Is it a pleasurable feeling? Is it negative, or is it neutral? It's a pleasurable sensation. That compliment, if we kept receiving it, would it maintain that state of well-being and happiness, or would we always need more and more? We would always need more. If someone came to us and if someone criticizes us instead, what's our feeling? Is an unpleasant feeling, isn't it? Because we project our happiness onto our image, and our image, unfortunately, our identity, and this is a great sign of immaturity. We project our identity much more based on how people see us instead of our own experiences of ourselves. And this is an enormous trap. How much energy do we waste in our life, or we use to, trying to give to others an image of ourselves to others, or trying to make sure that others see us in a certain light. So much energy. And so we want our parents to see us in a certain way. We want the people close to us, our partners, or friends, or the guru. As if it's like we continuously needed this kind of this need of being recognized and reassured, and because we base our identity on what others perceive, and not with how we are with ourselves. So this is a huge trap. So sensory pleasures, the objects that we believe we possess, with objects or relationships, and this recognition of our own image. Buddha calls these the suffering of change. These are things that appear as if they were pleasurable, but they are of the nature of suffering, because once you have achieved that with contact, then with the more, sooner or later that turns into suffering. If I get the most beautiful house in the world, they say, oh, wonderful, I have this new house, but sooner or later there's suffering. Not because the house becomes ugly or a person becomes bad, but the contact with that thing does not support that level of happiness. something that's very important to understand here is that sensory pleasures and the material objects or human relationships, interpersonal relationships, and our image in and of themselves, these are not negative or bad things. The problem is not the objects, but the problem is how we relate to them. When I project my happiness onto material things, onto people, I project my happiness onto my image, on the pleasures of the body. But these things are not able to sustain that happiness. So this second type of suffering is what Buddha called the suffering of change. How do I recognize this? It's like if I drink water, I have pleasure, but I don't project my life. I don't base my life on trying to seek and maintain and increase that pleasure, because I know that that's not the key to being happy. So the fundamental point is this third type of suffering, which is translated as the all permeating suffering. It's in so there's a part that's not translated from Tibetan. Duce. Duce means composed. So, Kyaba means permeating. So it's the composed suffering that permeates everywhere. Let's try to explain it better. What happens? Let me explain it with a little joke from my childhood. I was like 5 years old when I told this joke. Wherever I touch myself, it hurts. I touch my head, it hurts. I touch my shoulders, it hurts. I touch my chest, it hurts. I touch my knee, it hurts. What sickness do I have? Say I've got a sickness in my finger sickness. So we can change our family, we can change our house, we can change our body, we can change work, we can change 1,000 things, but we can't avoid being with ourselves. And every once in a while, it's a while I haven't heard this, probably because I've used it in teachings, and the people they don't say this, but before people would say to me, Lama, I need to take a vacation from myself. You can't. Wherever you go, there you are. You have to bring yourself with you. If I have deep fears, no matter where I go, those fears are going to come out, aren't they? If I have my traumas, my anger, my dissatisfactions, my sadness, no matter where I go, I'm going to bring these things with me. Wherever I go, I'm going to bring my own psychophysical reality with me. So, whatever I see, what I perceive it through the filter of myself. Like I use glasses. They're always dirty, but what happens? Let's say I have rose-tinted glasses and I go to a snow-capped mountaintop. I see the mountain as being pink. If I have blue-tinted glasses, the snow is blue. If I have dirty glasses, or black spots on my glasses, I'm going to see, some kind of dirt, black spot or some dirt. So the point is that when we have a filter, we see that reality through that filter. Everything that we see, everything that we hear and touch and experience, inevitably we experience it through the filter, through It's filtered through this reality of our psychophysical reality, our five aggregates, our body and mind. We're totally incapable of perceiving or living something independently of ourselves. So let's give you an example. I think it's happened to everyone to have this kind of like, in Tibetan it's called this like inner fever. You have this fever where the skin is very very sensitive, like having these micro cuts, and where you get when you if you're hypersensitivity to the skin. So at that point, if someone comes and touches you, then it, even like so as a caress, it hurts. But what determines that? What determines that pain? The act of a caress, or the fact that I have this hypersensitivity. Well, a little bit too, but there are two things together, because the person touched me and I have this hypersensitivity. In another moment, it would have been pleasurable. But in other moments, do we have this hypersensitivity, moments of anger or sadness? I mean, how do we perceive the world? How do we perceive the people that we meet and all our experiences? We experience all of that through this hypersensitivity. So this third type of suffering is when the body and the mind that are polluted by mental defilements and karma. The five aggregates that are polluted by mental defilements and karma. In easier words, what does that mean? As long as my body and my mind are influenced, are polluted by ignorance, anger, fear, jealousy, envy, selfishness, the insecurity, the low self-esteem, and all the other different forms of mental defilements, and also polluted by the actions that I have already done based on those mental defilements, because we have so many imbalances that have been created by choices that we made in the past. This is karma. Karma means action, means today I have a psychophysical state which is a result of all the choices that I've made up till today, for my past. And today I'm a result of all the choices I've made, and I'm influenced by what I lived in my childhood. I'm influenced by all the interactions of my life and also previous lives. So this is karma. When it manifests, it means the result, the reality manifests is a psychophysical reality based on the relationship and decisions taken in the past. So when we react based on these mental defilements, the actions taken based on that bring suffering. So as long as our psychophysical reality, our mind and body, are polluted by these so-called mental defilements and karma, we're going to suffer. And we could go anywhere. Maybe we find ourselves in a context where the conditions, the conditions are not present for the suffering of suffering. But if I just change the conditions, then they would come out. So recognizing the suffering, all permeating suffering as suffering, is one of the most important points along our spiritual journey, along our spiritual path. Because if I see suffering only as mental and physical pain, then I'm going to look for the causes in the mind and the body.
La mia tendenza magari è quella di cercare di
Instead,
evitare le varie situazioni che poi prima o poi diventano sofferenza.
if I
Ma se io non
also
rispondo a questo, non
recognize,
rispondo.
the suffering is suffering of change, then maybe I try to avoid one and of one. But if I recognize the, I recognize
Dico la migliore
that
parola, perché non è nella loro natura
if I recognize
essere
the suffering, all permeating suffering,
come se fosse un cristallo che viene sporcato.
if I
Poi si capisce che
recognize
c'è intorno non è della
that,
natura del cristallo, però è lì. Ok? Comprendere
so,
questo
understanding that
vuol dire
our
cambiare
like
totalmente la direzione che
pure
diamo alla nostra vita.
crystal nature is
E per questo abbiamo
polluted,
punti che noi dobbiamo ritornare molto spesso a
and we need to
riflettere.
reflect a lot on this point.
O meglio, che cos'è la sofferenza? Che cos'è
Really
che devo
reflect on
evitare?
what is
Non è il
suffering,
dolore fisico,
what should I avoid.
non è la
It's not
situazione che
physical
ti dice
pain, it's not the
difficile,
experience
è la mia propria realtà
situation that I see as suffering.
infiammata
It's
da
my
riferimenti mentali
my psychophysical reality that is
che stanno
polluted by
naturalmente ci
my mental
portano a
defilements and
un mondo che
karma.
ci
And
parla
this is the
fondamentalmente
bridge
di
that
soldi.
takes us to the second question, which is why do
E
I
a differenza
suffer?
di quello che noi
And
normalmente vediamo, che la causa della
and
sofferenza è prevalentemente esterna,
so now we
Buddha ci ha
see,
detto che la causa
and
della sofferenza è di
Buddha
due
tells
tipi:
us that suffering is of
veleni
two
mentali e
types:
karma.
mental
Alla fine
um,
perché soffro?
mental defilements
Non
and
perché
karma.
quella persona si
I
comporti in
suffer
questo
not
modo,
it's not
ma
outside
perché io
me,
non
not because
riesco a
someone
relazionarmi con uno
behaved
stato o con
in
un
a
altro.
certain way, but I suffer because I'm not able to
Non
relate to
perché
that situation, that
mi manca
person in a
questo o
healthy
quell'altro e
way.
io
I
desidero
suffer
ma non
not
posso averlo.
because
Se noi
I'm
spieghiamo
lacking
in un modo
something,
magari più
but
semplice,
because
nella nostra visione
I have
moderna,
a
noi
desire of
soffriamo a
something that
causa di due
I
cose.
can't fill.
Noi
So we can
crediamo di
say that we
soffrire
believe that we
perché
suffer
non possiamo
because
avere quello
we
che vogliamo,
can't have what we want,
perché dobbiamo vivere
because
situazioni che
we
non
need
ci
to
piacciono
live situations that we don't like,
e perché
and
dobbiamo
because
separarci da
we
ciò che ci
need to
piace.
be separated
Se
from
noi
what
vedessimo
we
tutta la nostra
like.
sofferenza
If
in
we
tre parti,
really look
possiamo
at all of our
riassumere in questi tre
suffering, they
punti.
can be summarized in these 3 points.
È chiaro questo?
Is that clear?
Perché soffro?
Why
Perché
do I suffer?
cercate di vedere
I mean,
quando c'è una
try
sofferenza che si
try to see,
manifesta,
when some kind of
quali delle
suffering
tre categorie ricade.
manifests, see what
È perché sto
category it falls
vivendo una scena
into.
spiacevole,
Am I living
fisico,
a,
mentale, mi
a
ricordo
negative
di una cosa brutta,
situation,
vedo una situazione che
something
non mi piace,
like
ho un contatto
physically or
sensoriale che è
mental,
spiacevole,
or I have some kind
o è
of
perché vorrei una
negative,
cosa che non posso avere,
contact,
o perché mi devo
or
separare da qualcosa che mi
is
piace.
it because I
Ok? Di
have to
solito
be
noi vediamo che la
separated
sofferenza è
from
creata da
what I
questi tre
like?
punti. Chiaro questo? Riusciamo a riconoscere? Ok? Buddha ha
Something
detto,
I
sbagliato,
want more of, something I
non è
want to
vero.
avoid, um,
Buddha dice, non è
or have
vero,
to be separated
tu non
from. And
hai mai
Buddha says, no,
sofferto
that's
perché
just
non hai
that's
potuto avere quello che
wrong.
volevi.
You've never
Noi
suffered
non abbiamo mai sofferto perché non possiamo avere quello che vogliamo.
because
Non è vero
you
che
can't.
soffriamo perché dobbiamo entrare in contatto con ciò che non ci piace e non è vero che soffriamo perché dobbiamo separarci da ciò che ci piace.
He says that
Non è vero.
this is not true.
In
That you
realtà
suffer for these three things.
noi non
We
soffriamo
don't
perché
suffer
non possiamo
because
avere
we
quello che
can't
vogliamo.
have
Noi
what we want.
soffriamo
We
perché vogliamo
suffer
ciò che non
because we
possiamo avere.
want what we cannot have.
Ripeto,
Let me repeat.
non è vero
It's
che noi
not
non
true
soffriamo
that we
perché non
suffer
possiamo avere
because we
ciò che
can't have
desideriamo.
what we want.
In realtà
In
noi
reality, we
soffriamo perché
suffer because
desideriamo
we
qualcosa che
desire
cause e
something,
condizioni non ci permettono
um,
di avere.
where instead the causes and conditions of the moment do not allow us
Chiaro
to
tutto
have
questo?
that thing. Is the
Nel
difference between
primo
the two
caso io
clear?
soffro
In the
perché sono una
first
vittima del
case,
mondo,
I
il
suffer
mondo non mi
because I'm a
permette
victim of
avere
the
quello che
world.
io
The
vorrei.
world doesn't allow
E
me to
se lo
have what I
voglio lo devo avere.
want, and if I want something, I should be able to
Questo
get
è
it.
come noi
this is how we normally live things. In the second case, what Buddha explains to us is that we suffer because we project onto our reality something for which the causes and conditions are just not there. It's as if, like I said, I would like to have an eye behind my head because it bothers me when something happens behind my back and I can't see it. So it'd be very useful to have an eye behind my head. Be kind of cool, maybe useful. Maybe I start suffering because I can't have an eye behind my head. Someone really complains about this. I mean, what would we say to someone who complains and suffers because he can't have an eye behind his head, or so, or who complains because the sun sets every day? We will say the sun sets in the evening and not in the morning. I mean, we would say stop complaining and suffering for something that's just impossible. You know, but if I suffer in this present moment for something I cannot have is ridiculous, because this present moment is perfect in the sense that causes and conditions based on all the interactions that happened. This present moment is perfect. The future can be different based on the interactions that will come, but causes and conditions have created this moment as it is, and is perfect, and we're part of these causes and conditions. So in reality, we to suffer because we don't have something, because we can't have what we want, is an illusion. In reality, we suffer because we desire something that the causes and conditions just do not allow us to have. It's a little difficult to accept, but it's important to reflect on this, to observe. The second point, it's not true that we suffer because we come into contact with situations or objects that we don't like. We suffer because we don't like situations and objects that we inevitably have to come into contact with. Can you see the difference there? In the first case, I suffer because I'm the victim of the world, because I have to come into contact with situations that I don't like. And Buddha, instead, he explains to us that we suffer because we don't know how to live that experience in a healthy way. If someone reacts with aggression, we suffer. Why are we suffering? Because I needed to hear those words, and so the cause of my suffering are the words that that person said in this or that way. In reality, I'm not suffering for what the person said or the way it was said. I'm suffering because I'm not able to be in front of that person and in those words and in a balanced way. And I'm not saying that we should be able just to be able to do it immediately, but to understand that if the suffering really came from if the cause was what that person said, then everyone should react in the exact same way, which just doesn't happen. Everyone reacts differently. I mean, so what makes us suffer is not the situation, but how we live the situation. Even physical pain doesn't determine it's not does not determine suffering. It's possible to have physical pain without suffering. I mean, Lama taught us this many times, and once gave the example. He was in Brazil many years ago, and at a certain point he needed to go to the doctor. He always had trouble with his teeth, and he needed to have a root canal, which is very painful. And he was supposed to go like 4 or 5 days to the dentist to do 1 or 2 root canals. And the dentist, and the dentist gave him like Novocaine, and he went to the Gompa, and the Gompa was very, very full, but he wasn't able to speak because of the Novocaine, which had numbed his mouth. It was difficult. So the following day, he went to the dentist and he said, "Please don't give me any anesthesia." And the dentist said, "Okay, maybe if it were like if it were a something small, okay, but root canal is really painful." And then he had, in the end, he had him like sign a waiver that he didn't want it, and the dentist said, "Okay, please, 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 anything at all, just raise your hand." And then at one point he just raised his hand to say that the light was too much in his eyes. And he stayed there without even showing that, like no physical expression, facial expression of pain that showed pain. After the second day at the dentist, without anesthesia, the dentist went to Rinpoche's teachings. What he said later, and it's not that he didn't feel the pain, but the pain doesn't necessarily mean suffering. The pain doesn't mean suffering. This is another subject. I mean, this is possible. I mean, because suffering is a mental state. But here we're talking about the more advanced level. But to say, even at that level, a person who has a certain inner state of being can live physical pain without suffering. And this is possible. So the reason why we suffer is not because we need to live difficult situations, but because in our psychophysical reality, we're not able to live these situations well, and we suffer. And it's not. And the third point, it's not true that we suffer because we have to be separated from the things that we like, but we suffer because we don't accept impermanence, and we think that impermanent things should be permanent. And when something ends, instead of perceiving that that's its nature, we're just upset. So, in the second noble truth, it says, why do I suffer? Because we're taken by ignorance that manifests itself with self-grasping. We're not able to see anything independently of the I and the my, and as a consequence, we act with anger and fear and resentment and hate and envy and jealousy and attachment and so much desire and dissatisfaction, fear and loneliness. And as a consequence, then we react, and the actions bring consequences. They bring results, inevitably. It's like what happens with our body. If I have a physical behavior that's not healthy, when do those symptoms show up? When it's accumulated over time, the symptoms come out. It's difficult to see right away, the results. But after time, inevitably, over time, the results come out. And so the reason that we suffer is not because of the external context in which we find ourselves. Instead, this external context is just a condition um, where our karma and our and, and can ripen. The person we have in front of us, the material situation. Rinpoche, for example, something else beautiful I can say in this last period where Rinpoche manifested the state of sickness, I never saw him show any suffering, not even in the hospital. To the end, he was always there with his legs crossed, never showed any pain or suffering. Every time the doctor or a nurse came in, he would put up give the thumbs up, say everything's fine. So physically, mentally, he never showed any aspects of pain or complaint or malaise. And what does this mean? This means a being who is free from the causes of sufferings. You can put them in any context. It's not going to suffer. A being is a person is full of these ripening agents, and regardless of where you put them, is always going to suffer. So the root, the main cause is our ignorance, and that's not. And we're not going to get into explaining what ignorance is. But in essence, in ignorance, we're not able to relate to reality in a coherent way. We relate to reality of ourselves and everything that we perceive in a way that's just is not compatible with its nature, the nature of things. We see things that are impermanent as being permanent. We things. Instead of things being interdependent, we think that they're independent and autonomous. So ignorance, the ignorance of not seeing the interdependence of all things, or seeing that we're in a relative reality where everything that we perceive is also the fruit of the observer. Our tendency is to go to the mountain and say, it's pink, and then another says, it's blue. And then Buddha comes and says, it's white. And says, no, you're wrong. Hey, I see it's pink, I see a blue. He says pink with his pink glasses. And when we see reality, what we perceive according to us is the reality. Do we see it as the reality, or do we just see it as our own perception? We see it as being the reality. Has it ever happened to you that you saw something and then later you realized that you were wrong? In reality, it's all like that. It's not in the sense that it's wrong, that it's not right on an ordinary level, but everything that we see is our own perception of an interaction of infinite parts, but we don't perceive that. And when faced with that, we live as if we're totally disconnected, as if everything had its own autonomous existence, and as a consequence, we live, detached, and we're dependent on everything. I mean, we have a vision that's totally concentrated, based, focused on ourselves. And for me to be happy, I need this thing, and I need to avoid that thing. It's interesting because we live as if we were independent, but in front of this idea of being independent, then we're absolutely dependent on something instead of realizing that we're interdependent. And this is another subject that we're going to talk about tomorrow. But the fundamental point that I wanted to bring to today is, what is suffering? It's not just physical and mental suffering. I mean, we need to feel deep inside that as long as my body and mind, my psychophysical reality, my being is polluted by mental defilements, like ignorance understood like relating to reality in an incoherent way, relating with that which is impermanent as being permanent, or something that is interdependent as being autonomous, etc. This generates selfishness, obsession for self-gratification, and as a result, we react with all the anger and aversion and desire, and we act, and this brings suffering. So when it says recognize sickness, we go to the doctor, and if we have a good diagnosis, because up to now we thought that our sickness was about mental and physical suffering, and that the cause of the suffering, our suffering, was the world is not the way it should be, the way that I can't get what I want. I get what I don't. I have to live experiences I don't like, and I'm separated from the people. Separated from things that I don't want to be separated from. So instead, if we can, what Buddha teaches us with these teachings is shows us ignorant beings, those of us who cannot see the real causes of suffering. It allows us to see his vision, and as a consequence, behave accordingly, understanding that the situations that we live are conditions through which our mental defilements and karma manifest and ripen. So the people that we meet, the behavior of others, our body, how we live it, our environment that we live in, everything around us, everything that we relate to constantly is nothing other than a condition through which our mental defilements and our karma manifest. And here suffering manifests. Our karma, our positive karma, and our pleasurable experiences and our positive qualities manifest too. But now we're talking about suffering. So we're going to conclude today with this object this idea very clear. We suffer because we live conditions, or rather, everything that we're living around us. These are conditions, that where our mental defilements and our karma manifest and generates suffering. But the causes of the sickness should be abandoned. So we need to abandon our habits and our behavior and our mental defilements. But how can I abandon fear and envy and ignorance? I need to begin with physical and verbal behavior. Then that will in turn influence the mind, and tomorrow we'll look at the path that shows us what we need to do to cultivate our positive qualities, and we'll see that just like light eliminates darkness, our positive qualities will eliminate our negative our mental defilements. So by developing so it's not like we should feel guilty. I have too much anger, I have too much anger. No, we need to direct ourselves towards love, for example.
Però dobbiamo
We
riconoscere che
need to
davanti a questo,
recognize that anger brings suffering.
con questo concludiamo in
So
modo
here
semplice,
we just conclude in a simple way without getting into details. We conclude these first 2 points of the first 2 mental, the first 2 noble truths
e avversione, rabbia.
without getting into the details
Se i veleni mentali
um,
all'inizio,
of
20 veleni
our
mentali
mental
scontati
defilements.
e tutte le altre manifestazioni. Buddha ha detto che in totale noi abbiamo
Buddha
80.000
talks about
veleni mentali.
84,000 mental
Che sono le
defilements.
varie
These are the
manifestazioni
different
di rabbia,
manifestations of anger and jealousy and fear. And we could go into details also on the law of karma. But to explain all this in details,
prendiamo almeno una
we
settimana.
need, at least a week if we wanted to go into to details. But what I wanted to leave you today was a general idea, which is very important at the beginning. Understand, what is my suffering? How do I see it? And how does Buddha show it to me? You know. So why do I suffer? And how does Buddha show it to me?
Perché voglio avere quello che non
So
posso,
I suffer
perché devo avere situazioni che non mi piacciono e
so
perché devo separarmi da quello che mi piace.
because
Questa è la visione ordinaria.
the ordinary vision
Quello, la
um,
lezione che Buddha ci ha dato.
is is that we live experiences that that we
Questo è fondamentale.
the ordinary view is that we don't get what we want to get, that we have to live situations we don't like, and that we are separated from things we love. But instead, it's really important to look at this all-permeating suffering. Mm?
Perché ovunque noi ci siamo,
It's it's all permeating. It's omnipresent. It's our own physical reality through which we experience everything. So that means that when I see the glass, this glass is of the nature of suffering because it does not exist beyond my own perception. And so naturally contact with this object is going to bring suffering. Not because the object in itself is bad, but because I am going to pollute it with my own mental defilements. I can have Buddha in front of me. Sooner or later, I'm going to come into conflict with him, not because the Buddha is bad, but because I'm going to pollute him with my own projections, my own perceptions. So this permeates everything that we hear, see, touch. We pollute with our own reality.
Perciò
So
l'unica vera
the
soluzione
only real solution is to eliminate this suffering, this all permeating suffering. Everything else is just superficial. It's fine to avoid, unpleasant experiences, but we know that this is maybe momentarily keeps us from suffering, but it does not resolve it. So what Buddha brings us a long-term solution, not just for the moment. This is also another important difference. So with this, we conclude for today.
abbiamo aperto degli argomenti abbastanza
We've opened up some really vast subjects, but let's keep them a little. We keep them a little simple. Tomorrow we'll look at these other two aspects. This afternoon, Lama Caroline will explain the Sutra of Lalita Vishtara, which is the life of Buddha. It's very important. That's like the life of our own gurus. It's this example of what we can do, because Buddha said, I managed, you can do it too. And the only reason why the Buddha explained the Four Noble Truths to us, because he knew that we could all do it too. We could all change our view, change our behavior, and reach a state of peace and this so-called nirvana. So it's important to also see this example and follow. So let's make the final dedications for today. That's all for this morning.
Possano i tre gioielli
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday,
possono aiutarci ad ottenere tutte le realizzazioni e cospargere il sentiero della nostra vita con molti
may
segni.
the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us
Buon appetito a tutti.
to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.